Okay, welcome to the CEFACT Global Trust Registry project meeting on this sunny morning of the 1st of May in Australia. Maybe not the 1st of May in other parts of the world, might be the 30th of April still. We as a group are very well aware of the product code of conduct and the intellectual property rights. No need to dwell on these, but they're available if you want to look at it. It's an open development project that we're running. And I think we're about to have Daryl O'Donnell join us. Yeah. We can bring him in. Bring in. Okay, cool. Welcome, Daryl, as you're coming in. The agenda today is pretty well the standing agenda we're going to use going forward, right? So basically, if there are new joiners and so on, everybody on this call has been on these meetings before. Hi, Daryl. We basically will go through the open issues and merge requests and so on. We're getting quite close to hopefully a point at which we can declare this project available for public review. That's kind of what we're working towards. That process is a 60-day sort of window, I suppose, where the project receives comments from anybody that wishes to comment on the project, and we decide if and how we can manage those comments and make changes if we do need to. At the end of those 60 days, the CEFACT Bureau can then decide, okay, the project's produced its deliverables, and what's the next phases. Now, for this project, what we are working on in parallel to the sort of documentation are pilots. So we're going to talk to those a bit today as well. So I will bring us to our issues or merges. We did a merge yesterday. I said that's about 17 hours ago. Where we pulled a new definition of the digital identity anchor into our branch, into the main branch. It's only one. This is the only change in that merge request. It was a sort of a simplification of the words we were using to define digital identity anchor. And at the same time as that merge having gone through, we realized we had an outstanding issue that had been raised by another project participant on that definition. Now, this definition of digital identity anchor is kind of important to this whole project because the GRID, the Global Registrar Information Directory, kind of only deals with two concepts. One is the actual directory, who's in the directory, kind of what is it that they register, what country are they from. These kind of topics are part of what the GRID's thinking about. And the other thing that the GRID's thinking about is what do those registrars issue as a recognition to their clients, to their members. And in UNTP speak, those are digital identity anchors. And it's quite possible that the digital identity anchor is also a thing that the GRID might send out to members of the GRID, to the registrars that it registers. And the reason that the GRID might do that is a kind of walk the talk kind of process, which means now there's a proof held by the registrar that they are a member of the GRID, even if the GRID's down. They can prove that they're a member of the GRID. So this idea of the digital identity anchor becomes really quite kind of central. It's an incredibly simple data structure. The process for our benefit, Daryl's too, we've gone through a process of simplification of this idea of the digital identity anchor. We've played with a number of sort of qualities of it where it could have many different identifiers in it. So the example would be Registradores, our Spanish participant, is a member of GLIFE. They're a local operating unit for GLIFE, so they can issue LEIs. They issue their own Spanish business register identifiers to Spanish businesses. And they are part of the EUID kind of We Build consortium on a large-scale pilot. So they've got three potential identifiers that that they can kind of are qualified to and can commercially issue, perhaps to the same organization. So at one point we're thinking about, well, does the DIA that they issue as part of UNTP include these three? Because one of the qualities of the DIA is it's not a new identifier. It's just wrapping up existing identifiers. It doesn't create a new thing. And the other question in our minds was, should it have more than one DID? Because the two fundamental atomic kind of elements in the DIA are the identifier that the register is issuing or in control of, and the DID that is supplied by the applicant. And those are the two sort of elements. And anyway, we've boiled it all down to it's just the identifier and the DID. And that's kind of how we've landed, because it felt much more simple if we keep it that way. So the what happened when we merged was we had this version I'm highlighting now is the version of text that you'll see online. Well, not this bit is the version you see online of the text. And Hans had suggested some changes to that text. So basically, we have an ongoing discussion of that. It's funny when you look at so few words are looked at by so many people. Everybody has a different opinion about exactly how to write this. But one of the things we might well do, as Joe pointed out, this phrase here, "and functions as a trust wrapper," begs the question, what's a trust wrapper? And unless that's in your glossary, your turtles all the way down. You got to start writing what the hell a trust wrapper means. And we feel that if you remove those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words from the definition, it still stands. So there's a couple of things we're juggling here. We want these definitions to be as short as they can be, but no shorter. We therefore don't want spurious bits in them. And the thing that Alina, my co-lead, was very keen to ensure is retained is this statement at the end, because there's some concerns that the DIA is another identifier, and we've already got enough of those. And therefore the intent is that however we simplify the leading words, we must make sure that the statement that this is not a new identifier is present rather in the definition. So that's where we're at with. That's where we're at with that. There's a few questions as well that Hans has asked sort of further downstream about these other elements, which I've sort of copied in there. And what we'll do over the next few days is just, I guess, a few people will jump in. You're very welcome to jump in too, Daryl, on what the interpretation of this. Joe.
Hi, Daryl. Good to see you. Hello, mate. Just one other thing. I think. Whilst removing those words, it makes it practical and possible. That's fine. I think the thing about this, and I was thinking about it overnight, which is why it's quite good to have two calls sometimes, so you can actually sort of learn from one and contribute to the next. But what I would say is that in attaching a decentral or creating a DIA, it actually gives more trust to the recognized identifier, whatever it is that you're presenting. So it just provides more trust. It doesn't need a wrapper or anything like that. It just provides more trust. That's all it's intended.
That's probably why, Joe, so these words trust wrapper appear in, I go into the documentation set. Sorry if I'm jumping around, it's a bit hard to follow, but on the actual web pages where we go into this, we'll use the words trust wrapper in this sort of more expansive sort of description of what we're doing. And I think it's a useful term, right? It's useful,
but it's unhelpful.
It may not need to be in the very sort of sharp definition in the I mean, you could anyway. We're spinning
on a
yeah. But we'll sort that out. But what that means is that if we close that issue and we'll do it appropriately, the only other two issues we're having, which you're in, actually, Daryl, you're in this discussion. The trust registry query protocol is part of our ongoing discussions about if and how we might. And the way we're handling that, as well as this linked verifiable presentation sort of question, is a little bit of a deferral. We recognize there's value in this. We're not quite sure yet how to accommodate it, but we don't want to forget it. So we're not closing the issue, and we're going to keep it kind of rolling over. It demands a bunch of other conversations with parties in the UNTP school and so on, but we're basically going to keep it live as a sort of point to keep discussing. So we're likely, in my opinion at least, to go to a public review status with those as live discussion topics, but not actually included as a sort of change or merge request.
I think, John, the challenge here is obviously we could the TRQP is very flexible and well defined in such a way that you can define it in this context. No question. I mean, it's been designed in that way. The question is whether we want to be limited to it or bound to it at the start, or we want to be able to engage with it or use it at a later stage, then we should be able to do that too.
I think you may want to take a look at the stuff we're opening up. It's actually, I think it's already in the system. But Sankashan actually, hey Sankashan, Sankashan put in a mega ticket that turned out to be a whole bunch of different issues on TRQP, which really is, given the core of TRQP, what did we intentionally leave out, but is still necessary, but it's not part of the core, both above it and below it. So the linkages to a UN CEFACT global registry could certainly be represented by TRQP could tap into that easily, and could make it easier for other folks who don't want to learn that much. Is that one domain they care about? Fine, great, go for it. You want to go deeper? Go native. Or here's your set of credentials you want to look at. Great. But Sankashan did a really good job. It's in the Trust Registry Task Force, kind of the what's next at the Trust Registry level type of thing. So that might shed some light.
Cool. I think what I guess, Sankashan, can you give us a link? Not, you don't have to do it real time, but can you give us a link in that issue to that ticket you raised?
Yeah, let me try and get that one.
2, 1. Come on, I thought Sankashan is usually like lightning on these.
It's 6 o'clock in the morning, Daryl.
We're meaner to him with our calls.
I can't believe anyone's been to Sankashan. That's just not right. Okay, so those are the two main issues. Now, what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on is a bit of update on the pilots. I don't have slides. I'm afraid you just have to suffer my dialogue here. So this project, the UN CEFACT GTR Global Trust Registry Grid Project, has two leads. The Spanish lead, Elena Nica Gales, it's 2 o'clock in the morning in Spain, so she's understandably not on the call. But the team in Registradores are about to hopefully press play on the active participation, actually building their end of a pilot. So we are right now, I've got up on other screens, sort of a 2-pager that's going to be presented at the board of Registradores to say, look, this is what you'd have to do. Now, the participation in a pilot for any of the registrars, the registries, if you want to use that word more easy, is designed to be as simple as possible, but no simpler. But it really shouldn't be costly in terms of effort, monies, resources, or anything else. So we're sort of working out, because a few of the obvious rules about pilots are you don't plug into operational data, you don't kind of do things that cause impact to costly and high risk systems. You use synthetic or test data, all these things, right? You kind of don't burn yourself unnecessarily with a pilot, and therefore it should be a fairly quick and simple affair to get up and rolling. But of course, we are dealing with registrars, so they take things very carefully, as they should. So there's a bunch of things. So what I'm basically saying is the effort to do a pilot is relatively small. The time to do a pilot might be a bit longer because you have to go through approval processes and checks and balances. But hopefully that will be given a thumbs up in Spain on Tuesday. And what we aim to have is, before our plenary in November, a number of working pilots, not just with Spain, but I take the Spanish example. The current use case is the idea of an existing Spanish company registered with Registradores becomes a participant in the pilot. And so Registradores ends up on the grid as a named registrar. They're given a DIA by the grid. They then issue a DIA to the company that they've already technically got in their books, but a sort of a pilot issuance of a DIA. That company then presents it to a border control in the US, say, or whichever sort of UN member state we choose, for their verification, so they can sort of prove that yes, it can be verified at that end. So it's a fairly simple end-to-end case, but obviously we can extend that to include other pilot participants. So we've got interest from, and I was hoping to see Canada on the call today, and the usual suspects, the usual friends of verifiable credentials, British Columbia and Nancy Morris and others. And also India, of course, has been expressing interest. So we can probably get together a pilot sort of ecosystem of 4, we hope, registrars and their companies and do something called a meaningful, all before the November plenary. Because what the grid does, and at least the simple issuance of a DIA does, is relatively simple, right? What UNTP does is a whole protocol specification for supply chains and scope 3 emissions and modern slavery. That's a little bit more complicated. But to get just a kind of organization to be recognized internationally is reasonably simple, and to get their registrar recognized in the grid should be reasonably simple. So we're optimistic we should be able to do this in the order of a few weeks, at worst case a couple of months or something, but not like months and years. That would be the wrong answer. So that's where we're at with some of the pilots. The other conversations that I'm in, we've started, or a project is starting with the National Association of Testing Authorities here in Australia. That's on looking at the application of UNTP for what it does. So many of us will know how this sort of system works, but any company that claims to have accreditation to, I know, ISO 9001 from a quality point of view, or to be running a test lab, to have a certified test lab means that some other party has assessed you against, you assessed your conformity against that standard. And conformity assessment bodies, as they're called, CABs, are given their authority by another party that is approved to do so. So NATA is one of the global authorities that's given authority to issue accreditation to CABs, which then audit companies and labs and other things to see them meet standards. So we're in the process of doing a project with them right now here in Australia, which will be another one. But the one that's probably most exciting, which I really do want to see come public very soon, is the work with the Responsible Business Alliance, where the very largest companies in the world are part of that group. And we keep hearing very positive confirmations that they will be shortly announcing that all of their suppliers will be adopting this process. And if they do, then everything changes. You know, one of the numbers we received from that group was that Microsoft have 45 million suppliers, which is a large number. And if they all follow UNTP, then that's a very large number of organizations. So those are interesting sort of numbers and times. So it's all getting kind of exciting. We're at the point, we hope, of going public with this review process. And that's all I had really prepared from a formal sort of walk through the agenda and the issues and the merge requests and stuff topics today. I'm going to give myself a pause and see if there's anything that Sankashan, Joe, Anne, or Daryl you want to say, and then we could probably talk about other things that are interesting if we need to.
I'm good, John. I'm very supportive of where we're at.
Cool. So one of the things I'll just highlight this because I think I showed it to the group yesterday evening, my time, is that there's a discussion that Steve Capel is encouraging on the use of the SD-JOT, as we like to call it, the Selective Disclosure JSON Web Token technologies. That's a part of the technology stack that's included in the European Business Wallet, and in fact, probably the architecture reference framework, I think, even for EIDAS generally. And Steve's asked it's not loaded, it's a genuine question. Does it offer any use for our purposes in UNTP? And his sort of almost debate-like position is to say that he can't see any use for it as it stands. He can't think of a use case in which you need SD-JOT. So there's a debate that's going on an issue that he's raised. So what I could do is I'll find.
And in LinkedIn, isn't it, John?
Yeah, he started it in LinkedIn as well. So I'll see if I can find the issue while I'll let people digest that for a second. I'll find the issue and share it, and I'll put the link on the chat. So if you wish to join in, you're frowning, Daryl. Come on, what do you think?
Is this going back to the idea of this trust wrapper? It's
no, that's a different. So the words trust wrapper were really just helpful, we thought, words or a vision to understand what a digital identity anchor was. So we wanted to use the words trust wrapper, reassure people we're wrapping existing stuff up in something that's trustworthy. We're not changing the content.
Okay.
This is more to do with the nuts and bolts of the way the spec works. So there are many interesting things about the UNTP specification. It doesn't follow our normal three-cornered hat model of issuer, holder, verifier kind of processes, where an issuer gives or issues to a holder, their wallet, a verifiable credential, which is then presented by the holder to a verifier in a sort of interactive process where there's a request and response and so on. It doesn't do that for a number of reasons. One of them, the most obvious when you think about it reason is this. A supply chain has many participants. And if you're at anywhere in the supply chain beyond the very beginning of it, to know who are upstream of you is a difficult question. And you can't expect to interrogate each person up the stream saying, will you give me one? Will you give me one? Will you give me one? So there needs to be a way of making these things accessible, and also verifiable, but without the normal wallet interaction kind of process to make it happen. So the idea that's quite novel inside UNTP is this idea that you issue those verifiable credentials as UNTP credentials that you are responsible for issuing. You make them accessible to others in a sort of trustworthy storage space.
But you are actually in that sense putting it in the wallet, if you like.
I know, Joe. I know. But Steve doesn't like. Steve doesn't like.
It just doesn't.
But and then the idea is that people link to us as JSON LD structures, so people can kind of traverse the links and effectively discover, resolve, and verify the graph upstream. And that's the sort of fundamental sort of architecture of UNTP. So in that concept, SDJOT offers a different, has a quality, but also has a challenge in terms of how it works. Now let me stop talking for a bit and see if I can find the issue itself. So that just that.
But the other thing,
I think Sankarshan already shared it.
Did he? He's so quick.
That's what I was saying. I was surprised he took that long to share his own link, because normally he's like, ba-boom.
But the challenge for supply chains is that there are certain parts of the supply chain, there's certain information within the supply chain that you might want to selectively control.
Yeah.
And how you do that has always been a bit of a topic, and I'm not sure that I'm on the latest ideas about how to do that at this point in time. I don't know whether you have, John, or
so this is the link that Sankarshan shared on our chat. We can all access this, and this is the kind of expansive explanation by Steve of the issue. I think you're right, Joe. So let's give one simple example of why supply chain participants are somewhat cautious about sharing information. So the normal idea is that one up, one down is the way Steve, I think, introduces it into this conversation. Yep. I think you'll see that phrase, right? And that idea is that a buyer is always happy to wants to know who their suppliers are. The suppliers know who their buyers are, but beyond that, it gets a bit opaque, because in a sort of middleman distributor sort of model, the middleman doesn't want his customers or their customers to know who their suppliers are in case they get disintermediated and their customers go straight to their suppliers and cut them out.
Yep.
And that very idea that your suppliers are part of your competitive advantage makes this idea actually of traversing a transparent graph
terrifying.
I was going to say interesting, but terrifying is another way.
I mean, there's a reason that people like paper. It's not transparent.
So what I'm interested in here. So my door keeps opening. What I'm interested in here is that I feel there's a possibility of using the almost the zero knowledge proof type concept to say you don't know who it is, but you know that they've got, for example, a modern slavery declaration says we're not.
Yeah, there's a trusted entity has said this. They're at stage. There's 3 levels back, but that's all you know.
Yes, you don't know who it is, but you know that all the way back on your supply chain, everybody says they're modern slavery compliant.
And this is so this is the case. I think Capella. The hard part is it's not a credential format problem. It's a business problem, right? From which you can derive what's the credential needs. But this might be a case where ZKP actually becomes necessary. But
could be.
That's assuming that people really are going to transit the full tree.
So,
Yeah,
so
you just need to know it's been through the process, and someone who's trustworthy and accredited
Yeah.
or
But
authority.
the problem with SD John is I know who you are because you issued it.
so
Yes.
so
Yes.
some of the regulations,
Yes.
by a side effect, demand transparency. Whether that was intentional or not, so give a couple of examples. The EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulation, says that you mustn't sell meat into the EU from land that was deforested to rear the cattle or the sheep or whatever it is that produces meat. And that, of course, immediately demands a sort of transparency process to sort of say, well, the farmer has proof that they didn't rear this livestock on a deforested place. And the same is true for these rather more complicated accounting things like Scope 3 emissions. How on earth do you calculate your Scope 3 emissions unless you know who it is that's upstream of you that's doing whatever they've been doing to generate the products that lead to your final product? So there's sort of side effects of some of the regulations.
That's where the ZKP world would say you can still do that ZKP, but what are you using ZKP that's going to get approval by governments? Nothing.
Yeah, so therein lies some of the rub. So I think these tensions are. Well, I mean, Steve's been at this game for longer than Joe or I or anybody else in this school probably, and I think that whilst they know those tensions exist, I think the expectation is there's a sort of a drive to transparency that's sort of kind of inevitable. You kind of like, and it's a sort of a hope that by having a more trustworthy supply chains, those companies in that trustworthy supply chain are beneficial.
Yeah, there's a lady who I'm trying to remember her name. She's like one of the gurus of Drummond, or John Jordan would know her name. Fantastic professor of on trust, and she would make a statement that transparency is not trust. Transparency approaches are brought in because you don't trust.
Mm-hmm.
And if you create transparency, you may end up creating less trust.
Well,
but not my problem to solve today.
I want to go back there, but I want to get to Sankshan first. Sankshan.
I wanted to ask, is all of this requirement for transparency well defined in regulations for us to then determine that ZKP or various SD approaches are suitable? Or are we first selecting the technology and then realizing that we'll run into regulatory changes that are required across the board to be delivering value?
It could be either, right? But I want to go back to that point that Darryl was saying about trust, because I think it's important and actually has a reasonable resolution, right? So I think we've all enjoyed or burnt our fingers on the word trust in terms of what it means and how you do it and all that stuff, right? And I think your explanation is very true, Darryl, that the demand for transparency implies a lack of trust, right? Where trust is confidence in this context of uncertainty. But let's put the hard regulator and accounting lens on this.
Yep.
Imagine if a company says, look, here's my Scope 3 emissions, and the regulator says, well, why are these correct? So just trust me.
No, exactly. I'm not.
Yeah,
here's part of her rationale. It's Rachel Botsman.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, Rachel. Yeah.
That's where I took that uncertainty quote from.
So it's got exactly. But her point is, transparency can reduce the need for trust by making everything verifiable and certain. Something that's closer to verification or surveillance. But real trust involves vulnerability and willingness to accept some uncertainty.
So I think were we to rewind a decade worth of writing about this shit, we would use the word confidence rather than the word trust. We want to increase confidence rather than increase trust, because paradoxically, if you're increasing trust, you're theoretically decreasing the need for evidence. It's that stupid sort of conundrum about the idea of trust that means that you're expecting there to be uncertainty or unknown qualities, but you still believe there's sufficient evidence of whatever nature for you to proceed. So I think it's a terrible word. Transparency, I think,
like many words,
doesn't bear much. It's like rappers. Don't.
You mean the singers?
Well, yes and no. Who knows? Bloody English. So anyway,
silent W. they get to know.
Exactly right, Joe. So anyway, so she's, of course, Rachel's right. She's wonderful. But I think it sort of leads us it doesn't help kind of resolve this conversation. There's some real nitty gritty commercial realities here. We've discussed that tension, right? That suppliers don't necessarily want their customer to know who their suppliers are, because there's a commercial risk for them there, and a whole bunch of other things. But I think regulations don't allow that. You're forced down this path. And I think the point I was making earlier about organizations like Responsible Business Alliance, I know it's only the IT industry that I've been naming, but if Amazon is more interesting. If Amazon, who have God knows what complexity of a problem to solve around their scope 3, and in terms of everything that's put on Amazon by everybody, is that their scope 3? And the supply chains of all those products, that's a AG and stable. Anyway, so I think that will drive us towards the legitimate transparent market and the illegitimate opaque market, which we no doubt already have. Anyway, enough of that monologue. But I think that's an interesting conversation. So if you do have I think I've seen a few comments. Yeah, there's a few comments here.
John Jordan and I talked about how I thought that his team back when he was working with all the Stephen Kern and crew for helping Nancy Norris, that they actually had a kind of a walker that would go from mine to initial intermediate product through to finished product through to used in manufacturing. And it was walking and it was just grabbing, I think it was actually grabbing ZKPs just along the way. It says, oh, you are an entity in the ecosystem who said the following, I can accept that. That was enough. But I think they actually did walk it. The difficulty they had was there was no quote wallet. There was a folder on a web server.
That's okay.
Wallet.
That's like a UNTP. Yeah. That's a UNTP model, right?
Yeah. No. And that was it. Was in the UNTP context, but he's obviously not on the call. So I just remember him describing that to me, that it was just credentials sitting there that they were parsing and saying, yeah, they knew that it was from a trusted entity in a particular ecosystem. That's all they needed to know.
But the point is, it's broadly available.
Yeah,
I think, and if you've got access to the site, then you've got access to it.
Yeah, which if it's an SD jot, I can just grab the whole damn thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm doing my own verifiable presentation,
sure,
right?
Sure.
Yeah,
but it doesn't. If it's useful for you, great. That's the challenge, right? In a supply chain scenario, it's lots of different, producers, consumers, and various different, steps that you don't want to control. So you just need to make it available.
Yep.
That's the thing. It doesn't have the sort of same control or concerns of personal credentials or specific credentials.
So I think this is one of the back to the sort of gist of this issue that Steve's sort of flagging up. It raises other questions, of course, about this whole topic we're talking about with transparency. The other topic this week that's been engaging me more than I ever thought it would be is this idea of conformity vocabularies. So the challenge that Steve wants to address in the UNTP, and I think it's one of those that will need addressing but isn't immediately addressable, is this idea of how do you know that a measure or a value that's ascribed to conformity in one country is the same as in another? And my terribly simplistic way of suggesting a way of thinking about that is, let's take the EUDR, European Deforestation Regulation. So it's entirely plausible that on some land trees both grow, die, and are replaced, right? So none of that may be deforestation; it may just be natural. But what constitutes a tree? Is it a plant that is over 2 meters tall, or over 1.5 meters tall, or something that has a certain sort of circumference, or what's a tree, right? And if you're only dealing with units of trees, then you're not sure about how that unit is measured unless there's some standard international unit of a tree. And then where you can see where I'm going on this. The conformity vocabulary is an attempt to define a schema, a data schema for conformity that gets right down to the nitty-gritty of measurements of things. And I think that's, while we can imagine that's necessary, but ultimately for a comparison of things on a global scale, we can also imagine it's very difficult to get there. And that's one of the other elements of UNTP. I think that's going to take a while to settle as it's sort of being developed. Interestingly, in a conversation with Steve and others this week, I said, what if we don't have a CVC? And after a period of time, we kind of agreed, well, we'd actually be okay. We don't have one now is one way of thinking about it. The world
So we don't have a what?
A CVC, a conformity vocabulary. So if I were to go
Okay.
let's go to UNTP and do it live.
Right.
So this specification has in it this thing called a conformity vocabulary. And it's got an idea about how these parties would exchange information. It has this idea about a scheme, conformity scheme, which has a profile and criteria. It gets right down to criteria and topic. So we were talking about reinforced steel at great length. Well, actually, no, at 20-meter length and 20-centimeter diameters, and God knows pulled wire and all sorts of other stuff around earthquake tolerance and Pascal units and whatever else. So there's these specific topics get very, very granular, and what Steve's trying to do is to define a set of criteria for a conformity vocabulary, and it's got a sort of logical model. And I kind of just feel that I can't see them right now, but there'd be monsters in that if I looked hard enough in that map.
Yeah, I can see in some domains that becoming critically important, but in others,
so
rice is rice, or
yeah, sometimes it really, really matters.
The tree comes down to what are you doing it for? For carbon? Okay, well, let's measure it in carbon.
So anyway, that's an ongoing discussion within UNTP. It's quite live. I think it will take a while to settle. They are, I think, hopeful to release. You'll notice if you look at these pages for UNTP, these start with this this comment here, and
they're looking for a public review starting on 10 July. Nice.
Yeah, and you can see the previous issues of content. So if I were to go to Digital Public Passport, I can't see it now. But you can basically see the 0.6 version. You can see the 0.7 version. You can see where they've changed. So that I think this release is going to be a 0.7. I think when it's released. All right, I'm kind of done. I don't want to make the meeting.
Well, thank you for doing this.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Daryl. Good to see you, mate. Good to see you, Anne.
Sorry I didn't get to see you in person. It's funny how many people I know from Australia say you're gonna be. I'm like, I'm around Brisbane, man. It's a big country.
We won't forgive you, you know, Daryl. It's like you've done that one.
All right, next time you're in Toronto and I'm in Vancouver, we'll have a talk.
I know.
It's like it's only a 3 or 4 hour flight.
I'm in San Francisco in November, but
I'm not talking to you anymore.
All right. Okay. You wouldn't want to come to the US anyway. They wouldn't let you. Yeah.
Let me stop the recording briefly, and then we can chat on it, because it always takes me ages to stop the recording. So let's. There must be a good way of doing this, and I don't know what it is. Stop the recording. Stop.